We're hearing from our live stream audience. I heard, in fact, my son is out in California. He's an attorney, and I got this text from him saying, hey, that lawyer rocks. She knows what she's talking about. Well, we have a wonderful afternoon scheduled. And speaking of my son, I had to call him the other day while he was at work to say, okay, so what's that app that I download that you can get a car that's not a taxi? And he's going, Mom. And when I got on Instagram a few months ago, it was talking to his fiance, Nina, who sort of gave me a personal one-on-one tutorial on Instagram. And I must confess that she had to repeat some things more than once, more than twice, and perhaps a few things more than 3 times. So with the idea that most of us have that when it comes to technology, the safest thing to do is go find the young person in your house to explain it, we're embracing that spirit as I introduce Jeanette Getrost. There's Jeanette. She lives in Los Angeles, and she has a background in figure drawing. But in the last 2 years, she's done an amazing thing. Her whole business model, structure, everything is on Instagram, online. And you talk about creating something from nothing. She has really just skyrocketed to the point where Vogue magazine has called Jeanette the new it girl of fashion illustration. So she has clients like Chanel, Coach, Estee Lauder, Project Runway. She's got 90, as of last night, 90,000 followers on Instagram. And she's going to be explaining to us how she makes a living doing this, how she approaches branding, what her business model is. We're going to learn a lot about how she got into it in the first place, and I know you're going to be inspired. She'll do part of the presentation here, and then she's going to sit down and join. You all know Clark Olson from Bonner David Gallery. But he's not only a gallery owner and director. I've known Clark for years as Dr. Olson. He is a professor of communication studies at Arizona State and knows a thing or two about communications. And we knew each other for many years as colleagues. I was in the state university system in California, and he was here in Arizona. So it's really fun that our friendship has transitioned from academia to the art world. And I think I speak for Clark when I say we both agree the art world is a lot more fun. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Jeanette and then to Clark.
Hello, everyone. I don't remember the last time I spoke into a microphone. So yeah, I'm going to sort of be sharing with you guys my background into how I got my start on Instagram, and then sort of provide you guys with hopefully some useful tips on how you can apply these ideas to your own careers and to better brand yourself as artists. So prior to my start on Instagram, I was working for a brand and retailer in Los Angeles. We were a vintage store, as well as the woman who owned the shop was also a designer, mostly of like sort of red carpet, ready-to-wear dresses. And so we had a really great clientele of actresses, costume designers, a lot of sort of notable creatives. And so that's really where I learned sort of the power of social media for businesses in general. We would get a lot of fashion bloggers in our store. And what I was noticing is that they would come in, they would like snap a selfie wearing one of our dresses, and then we would get flooded with new followers on Instagram, with new inquiries, physical walk-ins. We made it a point to ask all of our clients how they learned about us, and most of them were saying like, oh, I saw you on Carla's blog, or like Jenny posted about you guys on Instagram. And so I made it a point to make that sort of my main job at this store. And I would do things like take pretty photos of our vintage dresses on a dress form and have a contact number, say what the price was, the size, and almost as soon as we would post it, we would get a phone call and people would purchase it. So I also saw the opportunity for Instagram as sort of like a marketplace. And then, so as you probably can sympathize, being an artist and working for someone else's vision is, not your ultimate goal. So I basically decided to use what I learned working for this company for myself, and I made it a point to basically brand myself on Instagram. I was really strategic in the beginning about what I was illustrating. I made it a point to post an illustration every single day. And so before I go into sort of talking about my strategy, I'm going to show you guys something that's hard for me to do, a sketch from a really long time ago, and then to recent, so you can kind of hopefully see the progress. So the image on the left of these 4 figures was sort of my first illustration that I posted on Instagram. The year prior, working full time, I don't think that I ever picked up a pencil. Like I don't think that I sketched at all, at least not regularly. So I do think that Instagram is just such a great platform for creatives because it gives you a place to post your work and you get that sort of instant feedback from an audience to see what's working. And so I would say that based on this image from a little over 2 years ago to a couple weeks ago, I think that I've gotten closer to achieving my vision and like what I'm setting out to do. And so I just kind of wanted to showcase that as an example. And so sort of my strategy was to get followers, and how I went about doing that was I was specifically illustrating brands, fashion bloggers, people that I thought would be inclined to repost my illustrations. So these are examples of Armani, which is a popular fashion house, Rachel Zoe, a celebrity stylist turned designer, and We Wear What, who's a famous fashion blogger. These are accounts that all have over 1 million followers, and so getting reposted by, these brands with huge following, you're likely to get followers yourself and just so much more exposure. And so that was sort of my model. And I would say that it was a really sort of like slow and then like exponential growth. I think the year to the date that I started posting regularly, I reached 10,000 followers. And then to a year and 2 months later, I'm now at 90,000. So you can kind of understand just really like how like monumental and exponential it can be when you're posting regularly and when you have sort of a strategy. In addition to just wanting to get reposted, hashtagging is really important. And I think that sometimes people misuse hashtags, and I think that you should think of it as a searchable term. Think of it as how you would Google something. So rather than like describing your piece in hashtags, hashtag the materials that you're using, like what your like subject matter is. So like I would hashtag fashion illustration, watercolor, sketchbook. Those are the kinds of things that people are looking for. So that's just sort of, I would say, a useful tip. And then in terms of branding, I'm going to go into sort of the style of posts that I do that I think work. I think a good sort of model to follow is when you're thinking of your brand as an artist, think of 3 key ideas that you're representing. So for me, I would say it's illustration first, fashion, and then lifestyle. And the great thing, about Instagram specifically is that, you have this sort of bio where you can write what you're about. I used to say fashion illustrator. I've dropped that just because I've taken on beauty clients and I kind of don't want to pigeonhole myself to that. But the great thing about Instagram is that you can basically become part of a community that you would otherwise be an outsider to, especially with fashion. It's sort of this like exclusive, community. And so for me, I was like, I'm going to call myself a fashion illustrator and I'm going to illustrate fashion, and then, started booking jobs as a fashion illustrator within a couple months, I think, of posting. So these are sort of going to be examples of the style of posts that I do. First will be illustration. I always, which has sort of become a signature, I always like to leave like the materials that I'm using, my paintbrush. I think that, especially because you're looking at an image on like a small screen, it's kind of hard to provide a context. And so I like to sort of give kind of almost like a part of, like, let people be part of my process a little bit. I think that it sort of humanizes your work, and I think especially because we're constantly bombarded with like visuals every day, that you sometimes forget that there's a person behind making all of these. This post, for example, I typically work in watercolor, and so for this piece I did acrylic on canvas, and I kind of wanted to showcase the difference from normally sketching on paper. So I have my feet in the photo just to kind of show scale, having like a palette, the materials, again, it's just, and it's a work in progress. People, I think, like to see the process, especially I have a lot of aspiring artists that follow me, and I think that it gives them that feeling of like, I could do that, you know, when they see a person behind the work. Again, having like your hand in the photo holding your materials, it just, again, sort of humanizes it. And I will say that most of, like, majority of the time when I take a photo this way, no matter what the artwork is, it performs way better than just having a final illustration on the screen. So then another component to my brand is fashion, and it's something that I've been more focused on because I think the more established I get, I really want to make it a point to work with clients and brands that I actually believe in, and that I think ring true to my own taste. And so I've been sort of sharing a bit more of my personality on my Instagram, which again, I think Donna said something earlier about being the whole package and being, you know, a person behind your art. And so I think it is really important to have a voice behind that, and the public really responds well to that. Another example of sort of doing like a street style post. I think selfies are okay in moderation. Again, I think if you overuse them, it's one thing. It does feel a little vain, I'll be honest. But at the end of the day, again, it's just people like to see you. And then also lifestyle is a part of my brand. And I typically will try to keep most of my posts illustration centric, but having your sketchbook next to coffee or like a pretty meal, like people really respond well to that. This sort of almost day in the life post, you know. Same thing, you kind of can't go wrong with a nice latte in the sketchbook. And so using those sort of same models, I've kind of developed these like mini series on my Instagram, and they kind of, the next images that I'll show you are kind of like the images that clients, when they reach out to me, they'll like reference these style of posts like for projects and client work. So these ones are my sort of single figured gown illustrations, again having the paintbrushes in the photo. I think these group illustrations have sort of become a signature for me, especially during Fashion Week, which is a great time for me to post as a fashion illustrator. I like to illustrate the collections and sort of represent them in this group way. And then these minimal beauties are something that I started to do recently as well. And then I'll go ahead and show you guys sort of how this style of work has translated into some of my projects. And also it's good to have, to kind of, you know, on the days when you're not feeling super creative, when you like go back through your feed and you're like, oh, I can do that kind of a post today. You know, it kind of just like helps you like get into like a groove if you're ever feeling artist block, which I go through a lot. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk about some of my recent projects and how I would say like 90% of them have some sort of like social component to them. I have done some other things like package design, which is, I think, more traditional. And so these next ones, yeah, they all sort of have like a social media component to them. One of my recent clients is Project Runway. We just wrapped. I was working with them for their entire season, which I think lasted about 3 months. And basically the idea was that they would send me the episodes a couple of days prior to airing, and I was to illustrate the winning look, post it on Instagram the day after it aired, and then they would repost it on their own account. And really what that was doing was getting them more exposure from my end, and then for them, it was providing them with new content every week. New content that wasn't just about taking screenshots from their shows and then like posting on Instagram. This is an example of one of my clients who I've worked with on a regular basis. It's called Tadashi Shoji. They're a women's contemporary line. And this is sort of like a package that I did with them for their spring show at Fashion Week, at New York Fashion Week. And basically the idea was like, take a picture in one of our dresses and post it, which you see in the selfie. Cover the actual show, both backstage and front row. And then there's also an illustrated component as well. And this was all basically content specifically for Instagram that I posted on my own account and that they also posted on theirs as well. Another example, I worked with Estee Lauder recently doing a live event, which has become, I would say, like my bread and butter is doing live sketching at events. This particular one was at the Saks Fifth Avenue store in Beverly Hills. And for them, prior to the actual event itself, they had me illustrate their current face of Estee Lauder as Kendall Jenner. And they sent me product, and we sort of did this sort of, product shot with an illustration explaining that guests could come to the Saks store from a certain amount of time, get their makeup done at Estee Lauder, and then get an illustration by me. And then the second part of that package was to have my makeup done, snap a selfie, and then say, like, come meet me today from noon to 3 and get your illustration. And then the third example is like a quick sketch of one of the guests that came as well. This project was fun. It was another live event. And I kind of just want to showcase also, I think that brands are really like smart about how they're using artists. So this is for a new accessories brand who was opening their first brick and mortar in Santa Monica. And instead of having me sketch the guest on paper, which is something I normally do at events, they had the idea of me live painting onto their actual bags as sort of gifts for the editors and for the bloggers that came, which again I think is a really cool and smart idea, and it performed well on social media for them. And then this is an event I did with Coach over the summer in New York. I wanted to show you the example of how powerful social media is. So you have Coach who actually, reposted one of my illustrations that night about their event. The one in the middle is something that I posted. And then the third is Kiernan Shipka, who's the adorable little actress on Mad Men. She plays Sally Draper. And so she was also posting at the event as well. And so a lot of these events are all social media based. Having an illustration as like entertainment does really well. It's good for the brand. It's good for me, because most people are more inclined to post about the event if there's something that has to do with themselves. And then that's kind of in conclusion of sort of how I got my start, and just kind of the different ways that illustrators and artists are being utilized today. One more thing I will touch base on, I think I brought it up earlier, but using Instagram as a marketplace. I do sell my work. My site is down right now. It's under construction. But there's been a few times where I was like, I have so many originals because I sketched every day for 2 years that I would do these sort of flash sales. So I would post my illustrations, say the price, what time they were going on sale, and then link it directly on your homepage. So you can link right now, I have my press linked there, but you have an option to like link an online store. And so I basically would do these days where I would post originals, maybe like 6 or so, and they would sell out immediately because it gives people that like, it's in demand, it's one of a kind. And so if the the main part of your work is selling your art, I would use Instagram as sort of an online shop. Just a little tip. Okay.
Have we got this microphone on? We do. Great. Is Jeanette's on?
Hello? Okay.
Great. You talked about the power of Instagram. And as of September, Instagram had 400 million active users. More than 75 million people use it every single day. And 20% of all internet users use Instagram. 49% of these are female. And for those of you who are artists interested in selling your work, 1/3 of all auction sales from like Christie's and Sotheby's are related to the Instagram post. So, given that you spend so much time on Instagram, are there certain key people who you link to, who you use the word, it becomes exponential?
Mm-hmm.
And did you notice that when you were creating your career over the past couple of years, that there were key people who posted you and then reposted you, and all of a sudden it was, we call it the World Wide Web for a reason, that it just spiraled?
I would say it was mostly the fashion bloggers, because they have such a dedicated following, as well as they're being followed by some of the biggest fashion brands and editor like magazines. So yeah, I would say that fashion bloggers definitely have been my sort of best friends in the social community.
Okay. Since you're an artist as well, are there any art links that might be helpful to the people who are here that would help their Instagram posts grow as exponentially as yours have done?
Some people who sell on Etsy, I think that linking them or hashtagging Etsy is always smart. Art people.
Tell us a little what Etsy is.
Etsy is an online marketplace where you can sell your work. For me, I don't think it's the best model because then you're basically thrown in again alongside your competitors rather than having your own online store. But let me think about that. That's a good question for the art community specifically. I would tag other like art publications, magazines. There's a lot of Instagram accounts that basically have huge followings and they just post inspirational content, and a lot of it is art. So I would definitely try to find those. Let me think of some,
Yeah,
and then
one or two
after,
that come to mind.
yeah, let me think
We'll
of
put you
some,
on the
and I'll
spot.
look through my account, my feed.
Yeah, no, that'd be helpful to
Yeah,
think about
absolutely.
some of those links that you might be able to get. Well, you were not an art major. You majored in journalism. How did you, in the spirit of the panel that's going to happen after this one, how did you kind of transition or use your journalistic skills as you bridged into a very successful art career?
Well, I would take it a step backwards. When I graduated high school, I was always interested in fashion, specifically growing up, more personal style, and I liked drawing. I wasn't very skilled at all. And so after high school, I enrolled at a city college, and I enrolled as sort of an undeclared art major. And I took a lot of figure drawing classes and drawing composition classes, and that's sort of where I developed any skill as an artist. But while I was in school, I had so many people asking me, like, what are you going to do with an art major? And, I think back in, 2006, when I enrolled, had I known what I know now about social media, I would have just been like, don't worry, I'm fine. But it was in a weird time because it was like Facebook was like the big thing. And it's like, how do you promote yourself on Facebook, really? And so suffice to say, I listened and I transferred to a 4-year and decided to go with journalism because I figured that I could work in public relations for fashion. And then once I got into that field, I realized I hated it. In college, my whole college career, like any opportunity that I could bring art into my, my student work, I would, I would like interview like galleries and like really try to do that. So anyway, yeah, I totally put it on the back burner. And so what I will say though is that I think having a background in journalism and communications, we always had to be like technologically and social media savvy. So I think just kind of having that under my belt in the end probably did aid in my my success on social media. But yeah, that's sort of my background.
You made that transition. All
Yeah.
right. Another word that I heard you use in your presentation very specifically was lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of curious about your personal lifestyle.
Okay.
Because you obviously have a successful business. How do you balance a successful personal life? You're an attractive person. You're out there meeting people probably constantly. How do you balance your social needs versus always being on the job?
That was definitely a struggle, especially my first year as a freelancer. I didn't have a routine. Like I would consider it kind of like a dark time, where there was like a few days where it's like I would wake up, maybe not even shower, start working right away, like forget to eat, and then at the end of the day, you're like, where did the day go? I never went outside, I haven't spoken to anybody, and it's not healthy, So it took me to actually have to force myself to like, I'm gonna wake up and first I'm gonna go to a coffee shop. Maybe it's 15 minutes, but it's like I put shoes on, I like combed my hair, and I had a conversation with somebody, and then I'll go back to work. As of late, thankfully, my career has really taken off where I don't have a lot of free time, but it's fine right now. I don't know that I'm necessarily balancing it in the healthiest way. It's typically like I should be working, but I'm gonna like walk around my house and like maybe like have my neighbor over for like a beer at 2 p.m. and then I'll go back to work and then, So I think it's also, it's okay to not get hard on yourself about working at weird times too. For some reason, I think because like growing up, it's like you go to school for this amount of hours and then that's like when you get your work done, and same thing with a 9 to 5. I had to realize that like creativity comes when it comes, and if I'm just not feeling it, it's okay to like step away from the work and like go take a walk outside. So in terms of balancing it, I think it will always remain a struggle, but right now I'm content with focusing solely on like work comes first. I know it's a lot. I don't know if it's like even
I can't imagine anybody in this audience knows what that's like. Anything with relationships other than a neighbor that you have that kind of keep you grounded?
Yeah,
When you get lonely, what do you do?
I have a roommate, and I don't necessarily like need a roommate right now, but I want one because like he and I have become like best friends, and it's nice to like have that person around to kind of like bounce ideas off of, or just to like have meaningless conversation throughout the day. Again, I think that remaining that sort of like human contact is like super important.
I can understand that's important. Another question that I have for you is that Vogue has called you the new it girl. So you've obviously got this brand, and you're 27. What are you going to be doing when you're 37? If Vogue is already recognizing you, where do you go in 10 years?
I would say that partnered with talking about bringing like elements of lifestyle and my own aside from illustrating to my Instagram, I could see myself venturing into different areas, not just illustrations specific. Some of my peers who are illustrators are fashion directing for brands. I would like to, maybe work in more of a collaborative environment. I love film, maybe do some styling. And in terms of my personal life, I've lived in LA my whole life, and I would like to maybe venture out and live in different areas. So I would say 10 years from now, hopefully I'll be more than just an illustrator, maybe living somewhere else, or at least have had experience of living other places. And I also think of having projects that sort of like end up running themselves, whether it's my own brand, or using my artwork as textiles for fashion brands, things like that.
Well, with all of the experiences you've had and all of the people who you've met, are there 2 or 3 people who you've met along the way who you most admire, who you say, these people have the characteristics that I really admire and I aspire to?
One person that I met before starting on Instagram that was inspiring to me, I think that's sort of where I became inspired from the people that I met at my former job, because they were people that created their own jobs. And one person is Jeannie Bryant, who was the costumer for Mad Men. I just love her work, but her specifically, she has all this success, and she's just one of these like amazing people who's like nice to everybody. And I think that's really important and really refreshing, because you do, especially in my industry, meet people with a lot of egos. So I would say, yeah, I have a few just fellow creatives that are just all around like decent people. So yeah.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Anybody, if you were having a dinner party, you'd invite them to?
Oh, well, that's a different story.
Well, do tell.
I love comedy, so it would probably be comedians.
Okay.
I'm not very good at on-the-spot questions. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Well, if you're not good at on-the-spot
No,
questions,
let's
I
ask,
hate
does
to
anybody
throw
have
it.
any questions?
Yes, I hate to throw it out to our audience, but let's see what kind of questions you might have.
Who do you use for your online store?
I use Big Cartel.
Okay. Who do you use for an online store was the question. Go ahead.
BigCartel.com.
And can you tell us why?
Because it's basically your own online store. You're not dealing with like Etsy. You're not amongst competitors, and you can link it to your own website. Shopify, I think, is also a good one. I've never used it, but people seem to like it. But I think Big Cartel is pretty intuitive, and it's relatively inexpensive too. I think for me, I can post up to 25 pieces for like $10 a month or something like that. Whereas I think Etsy takes a percentage of your sales. So.
Can you spell that?
Big Cartel?
Is it B-I-G?
CARTEL.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions from our audience? Kathy?
At the very beginning, you were talking about 3 things and really thinking about branding and having a strategy on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to claim I'm speaking for everybody, but for myself, when I first got on, I was just, what's a hashtag?
Right.
I was in a panic state about that. And so to have my thoughts clear enough to think beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
and think that strategy is important, I think that's a key thing that I don't want to lose here, because I can honestly say, speaking for myself, I had about a week's learning curve where I just felt like a complete idiot on Instagram. And now I'm kind of getting the hang of it, so now I'm ready to start thinking like this. Could you repeat what those 3 things were and talk just a little bit more about how important it is to have a strategy, meaning you screen every single shot through those 3 items? Is that pretty much how you approach it, or?
Pretty much. I would say when you're first starting out, like, it's fine to just kind of mess around and see what's working. Maybe don't follow anyone yet, so they can't see what you're doing. But definitely become more comfortable with it. And there is a search option on Instagram, and they've changed a lot, where they have like suggested users, and is someone going somewhere? And so they have like suggested users within your like personal taste. So like you can follow like, famous artists or whatever that Instagram suggests to you. And I think that that's a good model too, to kind of see what other people are doing. And with that in mind, to not get discouraged, because I think when I was first starting out, I would see my competitors and I would get discouraged. And I was like, why are they getting these jobs and I'm not? But to remember that, like, if there is other people like you, it means that there's a market for yourself. And then in terms of actually, I'm sorry, the second part was branding specifically.
What were the 3 themes?
My 3 themes were fashion, illustration, and lifestyle. And an important thing too in everything that I post is, especially as artists, like, you should make your photos look as good as possible. And I would say to only shoot in natural lighting. Instagram has really great photo editing within the app itself, so to kind of mess around with that too. So I think the three ideas sort of happened organically and naturally for me. But for yourself, I think it's smart to start out and have those three ideas. You know, if you're an oil painter who paints landscapes, then it should be you're an oil painter. Maybe you take pretty photos of the landscapes themselves, things that inspire you, and then, you know, you can add a third component. Maybe it's like the color inspiration or things like that. You know, like Instagram users love consistency, and you should be able to go to your Instagram profile and be able to see exactly what you're about just at first glance. Another thing about the consistency, the Instagram community themselves, they oftentimes will pick up new accounts who they find inspiring, and they'll put you as a suggested user. I had a friend who's a photographer, and she went from 2,000 followers to 130,000 within a month because she got put on Instagram's suggested user list. So I think it's good too to kind of look at who they're profiling just as inspiration as well.
How do we get on that selected user list?
I think it's really by being consistent. You know, the fact that, you know, I don't even know how many employees they must have now, but they literally have like people who just search Instagram profiles. And so just maintaining that consistency and being really thoughtful in what you're posting. By taking good pictures, you know, especially as artists, I think it's important that we, you know, treat the photos as well as we, you know, go about our artwork.
Great. Other questions?
Can you just follow up when you said being consistent? Did you mean staying narrowed in on those three strategies, or consistency in the quality of what you're doing consistently daily?
I would say all of the above. The more you post, I think for me, I aim to post every day, if not multiple times a day. And I'm at the point now where if I'm posting regularly, I think I average like 100 new followers a day. And yeah, that's just sort of the...
Donna?
I noticed on your the words that you put up there that millions of people, well, okay, thousands of people, ask you questions every day. Do you respond to all those questions?
When they're questioning.
Yeah, let me repeat the
yeah,
question.
so she's asking when people when they comment on my photos. Yeah, I think that that's really important to have conversation with your followers. For me, I tend to have a higher engagement than some of my peers because I think some people neglect their audience. And so, yeah, all the time people ask, like, what kind of pen are you using? And, you know, they're redundant. They ask the same questions every day, but it is important to maintain that, I think, relationship. Or people will sometimes leave really thoughtful things, and it's like you have to respond and just be like, wow, thank you, you know? Yeah, I think it does become overwhelming, but for the most part, yeah, I think it is important to kind of keep that conversation. And really, brands, as much as having a big following is important, they're really looking at your engagement rate. So it's like how many likes per post versus like compared to like your following count. So I have, you know, there's some people who have 200,000 followers, but they may only get 600 likes a post, you know.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you might balance your day, how much you spend doing your fashion, and how much time you spend on the computer just responding to these people and posting?
It becomes a 24-hour job, essentially. The style of posts that I've been doing, I think I was speaking with you last night, I've sort of transitioned into using markers lately because I can produce a sketch much quicker than sitting down and painting. And then in terms of like fielding inquiries, you know, I do get a lot of emails every day, but I have hired a manager at this point to basically run sort of the business side of things. But yeah, I'm to be honest, I am constantly on my phone. I don't know if it's healthy, but I think it is important too to be mindful of like what is working. You know, if I post something that's sort of like out of the ordinary and it doesn't get that much of a response, then I'm like, oh, maybe I won't do a post like that again. Versus watching something like I have it down where it's like if I post something and I don't get 100 likes within 10 minutes, I'm like, that's a poor post. Whereas if I post something and I get 300 likes in 10 minutes, like that's a good post. So it does sound, I think, a little crazy, but I think it is important though to kind of be plugged in, especially when you're first starting out, to really like understand the way that the app works and how the public is responding to you.
How quickly are you going to post that you're at the AWA show? Making
I know,
a
I need to
presentation,
find a
and
good, I'm trying to think
everybody
of
better like it within 10 minutes.
I'm thinking of taking a photo from behind the room of the whole screen or something. We'll see. Yes.
Question from the back.
One of your illustrators, you were talking about like making yourself personal, and you had your paintbrush in there. Like on Facebook, you know, a big amount of my followers are other artists. What can we do to attract collectors? I don't teach workshops, I want to attract collectors, not other artists.
How do you branch out and not just have other artists following your Instagram post?
That's a good question. Honestly, I mean, are you strictly just posting on Facebook at this
Yeah,
point?
right now I haven't started Instagram.
Yeah.
You've got 10 minutes.
I would say that you're kind of pigeonholed on Facebook a little bit because on Instagram it's more searchable and like there are, I think, collectors and admirers of art that are searching for artists, you know? And so I would say that maybe only 20% of my followers are aspiring artists, and then the rest are people who just appreciate art in general. So I would definitely get on Instagram and start hashtagging and, you know, what kind of medium, are you an oil painter? Watercolor? Yeah, honestly, start hashtagging watercolor. Art sale, like hashtag art sale. See what kind of, because you can search hashtags and you can see, they'll show a number of how many people have used that hashtag and see what's the most popular in terms of like literally saying like art sale, like gallery, things like that, I think would be a better market for you.
Another question in the back?
I'm going to answer her question as a collector and then ask my own question. It's interesting because being a collector is a lot of work because you buy because you love art and maybe you have homes to put the art in or maybe you're collecting for other people. But I am going to explore this as a way of doing it using the online medium. So I'm going to start looking at this, like art, who's got art, how are they selling it? I think it's brilliant. If I could buy it that way instead of having to drive to Santa Fe to the galleries and drive here and drive there, it would just be awesome to buy exactly what I'm looking for at that moment in time. I want a contemporary watercolor or acrylic or whatever it is about some subject matter. It's like personalized shopping.
Yep.
It could be. And I'm very intrigued about this as a collector. So if artists start doing this, it's going to make it easy for me. Everyone I know who likes to collect.
Yeah, I would say, and most artists and illustrators are definitely linking their shop to their.
Yeah. And then you'd have to have a website behind it for sure. So when I clicked in, I could go. And my question is, when you made the comment about it's very important the quality of the photo that you put up, which makes sense. Everyone I know uses their phone for everything. I don't. I still use a camera and such. But do you use your phone or a camera to take your photographs?
I only use my phone.
You do? Okay,
Yeah.
so the quality is good.
I have my iPhone 6, which,
Okay.
yeah. And to be honest, it's a little silly before I actually post. It's like I will have probably taken like 30 pictures of the same thing. But again, I sort of have developed my like what works, you know. And yeah, so I also there's an app called ViscoCam, which is really wonderful too. It's another photo editing and it's super intuitive. There's filters which I don't always I like for my photos to look as natural as possible and not like I put a filter on them. But yeah, there are some great photo editing, and honestly, the iPhone takes beautiful photos. I think you've probably all seen their like recent ad campaign, which is like this was shot on an iPhone 6. So I don't think that it's necessary to have, unless you're a photographer specifically, I don't think it's necessary to have an actual camera just for Instagram.
Another question in the back.
Do you ever go through your, I'm about 6 months into Instagram and still learning it. Do you ever go into your gallery and clean up and delete photos that maybe didn't, I mean, how many do you need in there?
No, I don't. I mean, it depends. To be honest, like working on this presentation, I was like going back through my archives and I was cringing because, again, when I was first starting, like I'm embarrassed to look at some of the stuff that I was posting, but it's fine because I think it's all part of the process. So at this point, no, I don't really go back through and delete at all.
So you can archive, there is some way of, not having all those photos on your phone or whatever. You just archive the photos, you archive your Instagram posts.
What's the nature of the archiving that you do?
Thank you.
The nature, meaning like, do I keep the original photos on my actual phone as well?
Well, the whole thing, how do you archive things? How do you?
Oh, well, it just, the app itself is just sort of a timeline. You know, you basically have to like, I think it says that I have like 1,400 posts or something. So like I would literally have to like scroll backwards and I'm hoping none of you do this because you'll see some like embarrassing things on my Instagram because I never transitioned. I transitioned from like using it as an app to like see what your friends are up to like a business. So it's like my first posts are just bad photos with like frames around and like bad filters and stuff. So.
But if you take 30 pictures of the same image, you don't keep all those in your phone.
Oh, no.
You'll go through
No,
and
I
delete.
mean, I constantly every day, it's like not enough storage and I have to go back and like realize that, oh yeah, I have 50 pictures of the same thing in my phone.
All right, it looks like we've got time for one more question.
I just had a quick question, if you could explain a little bit about the importance of following people that have large followings and how that can help build your following.
Explain why you follow people who have large postings and what impact that can have for your own followers.
I think because you can learn a lot from them based on their style of posts and see what's working. I've also connected, I have like friends via Instagram that I've never met in real life, but like we've become supporters of each other, where we've shared each other's work and things like that, which is also really important. I totally believe in like embracing your community. There was another illustrator in the Vogue article with me, and she also lives in LA. And rather than seeing her as my competition, like we've become friends, and we're actually working on a project together that's coming out this week. So yeah, I think it is important to just kind of always be in that community, you know, because the more you post and the more you're around it, just the more creative you're going to become, and you're going to start thinking outside of the box, and it's just going to start feeling more natural as like soon as you just like are just part of it and make that your, you know, what you're about.
Well, I think for an organization like AWA, that's probably the best advice you could give, because that's exactly what these people are all trying to do. So that's probably a great place for us to end this particular session. Thank you, Jeanette, for the insight.
Thank you,
that you've given
everyone.
us.